Hi, I'm Greg Pollock, the product manager for UpGuard BreachSight, and today I'm going to talk about the subdomain takeover detection that we added to our scanning engine at the beginning of this year. Since adding this capability, we have been able to observe trends in what kinds of subdomain takeovers are most common and to compare the rate at which UpGuard users remediate this risk compared to other companies. First, how do subdomain takeovers work? These attacks become possible when the DNS record for one of your subdomains points to a specific address on a third-party site, and after your account on that site becomes inactive, other users can then register that address as their own. This situation most often arises with SaaS services that allow you to configure one of your domains to point to the software hosted on the vendor's domain. If your ownership of the account on that third-party service lapses, and you don't remove the DNS record pointing to it from your site, an attacker can then register that account and effectively take over your subdomain. In reality, there are often more nuances to this process, but that's the basic idea underlying all subdomain takeovers. These vulnerabilities have been a favorite with bug bounty hunters for years, because they can be detected using largely automated methods, and they can result in high-severity disclosures. For example, in 2017, a security researcher took over a vulnerable subdomain for Uber that allowed them to steal valid session cookies for users on any subdomain of uber.com. Starbucks also has paid many bounties for takeovers, including cases where having control of a subdomain of starbucks.com then allowed for cross-site scripting attacks. Research by other groups has continued to confirm that subdomain takeovers are a problem. Detectify, a product for testing web apps, recently reported observing a 25% year-over-year increase in subdomains vulnerable to takeover. Similarly, a paper presented at the 2021 Usenix Security Symposium surveyed the top 50,000 domains and found over 1,500 vulnerable subdomains. In our initial scanning, we found over 12,000 vulnerable subdomains. Of those, more than half were abandoned Shopify stores, a finding that corresponds with previous research. Now, Shopify is probably one of the services most commonly found in subdomain takeovers because it's used by small online stores, which can easily be set up and just as easily abandoned. The second most common service was Amazon's S3 bucket storage. Whereas Shopify is for small online stores, Amazon Web Services is more likely to be used by larger organizations. In fact, when we filtered our data set to only the domains of vendors monitored by UpGuard users, that is, only those that are part of real corporate supply chains, they were 2.5 times more likely to use S3 than Shopify. Manually inspecting the names of these vulnerable subdomains confirmed that they belong to enterprises in energy, retail, tech, and defense, rather than small personal stores. As these detections began to show up in the UpGuard platform, users took action to remediate their own risks and to notify their vulnerable vendors. Today, ample time has passed for us to compare the outcomes of those detected vulnerabilities for our customers, their monitored vendors, and all other companies. The results are what we'd hoped to see. The UpGuard platform greatly increases the fix rate, both for companies using UpGuard and for any companies being assessed by UpGuard users. Comparing the number of discovered versus remediated subdomain takeovers, UpGuard users resolved their issues 20 times more often than all other companies. Vendors monitored by UpGuard users remediated their vulnerable subdomains at 12 times the rate of other companies. Less than 2% of non-UpGuard affiliated companies detected and resolved their subdomain takeovers during a 3-month period. We also compared the time to remediation between these three groups. The average time to resolve for both UpGuard users and their monitored vendors was around 1 day. Now, given that UpGuard's default scanning frequency is once per day, it's likely that these issues were fixed even more quickly than that. For all other companies, the average time to resolution, when the issue was resolved, was around 10 days. Not surprisingly, just as greater visibility leads to a higher fix rate, it also leads to faster resolution. This data strongly suggests that despite the popularity of subdomain takeover hunting in the bug bounty community, there is a massive swath of the digital supply chain where they're still unknown. One explanation is that bounty hunters choose targets with bounty programs and especially those that pay well for their work. While there are many companies that do, there are also many more who are at risk and unaware of it. UpGuard is not a replacement for penetration testing, but it is a valuable complement both to detect high-severity risks in your attack surface and to extend that visibility to your third-party vendors. Here we have the evidence that this capability and the diligence of our user community can and do make everyone safer. Thank you.